Part of our human life experience, I think, is to have great expectations. We aspire with hopes, with dreams and wishes. In our mind's eye, we create an expectation of what will happen if we do this, or if we think this or that. Great expectations. The title of a classic novel by Charles Dickens. Some of you have read it or not in high school. The story is about an orphan boy who has both bad things to happen to him and good things throughout his life. A review of the novel says that, to quote, during the course of the novel, Pip comes to realize that his great expectations of social standing and wealth are less important than loyalty and compassion. At least that's the conclusion of a Cliff Notes summary of the story. What, you expected that I would read the whole novel? Today we're going to talk about great expectations, about how people might react when their expectations are not met, and what can a person do to avoid a reaction to unmet expectation that chips away at peace and enjoyment in life. God calls us to live life filled with joy. That's a life that does not necessarily jive with our own expectations or wants, but it's one in which the pursuit of happiness is reliant upon the inner self rather than on social standing and wealth, like in the Charles Dickens novel, or dependent upon things external to the individual. Expectations help drive us forward and onward to strive for higher existence. They can do that, or expectations can taint our experiences in life. When we expect great things to happen that don't happen, disappointment takes over. When our expectations are out of sync with reality or with what actually happens, we set ourselves up for disappointment. There's a slogan that says, expectations are nothing but premeditated resentments. Expectations are nothing but premeditated resentments. Resentment is one possible reaction to unmet expectation. Just as an example, in recent years, many younger folks have been sold in the expectation that if they go into debt to obtain a college degree, when they graduate, great things will just naturally happen. They'll get a dream job easily. They'll be compensated enough for paying off the debt. And they'll be able, on top of that, to still be able to purchase an expensive car, buy a home, take a vacation, eat out all the time. What else do we like to do with our lives? We've got a generation of young people so saddled with a debt that they no longer want to serve because they don't see it as an investment that was worthwhile. Unmet expectation comes with a reaction, perhaps resentment, perhaps disappointment, perhaps delusion. Some people express disappointment by simply becoming sad or depressed. Others react with a denial that projects blame on another person. It's your fault. Still others react in anger. The depth of disappointment might bring different reactions. With great expectation comes at a risk of great disappointment. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem was a snapshot in time of great expectations being expressed. It was a celebration. It was recognition of Jesus Christ as Messiah. We all know the story and the events that caused that joy as we go on in the week to eventually come crashing down. The expectation of the moment, I think, of Palm Sunday is reflected in the hymn, "Come, thou long expected Jesus. Come, to set thy people free. The expectation was that Jesus was going to free Israel from Roman oppression. And he did offer freedom from oppression, but not freedom from Roman presence or from realities of life. Jesus faced great expectation. He was at the pinnacle of his prophetic career, at least by human standard. He was widely recognized for his wisdom and for his healing power. More and more people were identifying him as the long-awaited Messiah of whom the prophets foretold. Now, not everyone projected great expectation onto Jesus. Some projected fear. The keepers of the law already knew Jesus as one known for putting them in their place. His wisdom and knowledge of the Scriptures was unsurpassed. The Messiah the Pharisees were looking at, or looking for and wanting to see, was one who would insist on keeping what was Jewish, Jewish. One who would purge the Hebrews from the behaviors of the Gentiles and the influences of their neighbors around them. They were looking for a Messiah who would solidify their power as keepers of the law, and as law as the way to salvation. The Pharisees saw in Jesus something else, something not what they expected, and concluded that this was not their Messiah, not a leader that they would get behind and support, because his message did not benefit them. Many other Hebrews, on the other hand, had great expectations of Jesus, and they uplifted him. They were joyous in their expectations. But unfortunately, their expectations were not united. It said that a house divided will soon fall, and the house of Jesus supporters did not all rest their expectations in a God who places spiritual wellness above temporal, like material, physical, and worldly gain. A Reverend Anders online suggests that the majority of the crowds who greeted Jesus and celebrated with palms and cries of joy as he entered Jerusalem, he says they wanted a miracle Jesus. They knew he had a reputation for healing the sick and the blind, and they wanted more miracles. They wanted the assurances that the needs of the human body would be met, that he would not only feed 4,000 or 5,000 from a few loaves and some fishes, but that all of God's people would be satisfied and hunger would not be an issue in the world any longer. They wanted and they expected Jesus to cure leprosy, blindness, and any other weakness of flesh so that all human bodies would be perfect as our heavenly bodies will be. They wanted and expected Jesus to raise Lazarus, the Lazaruses of their families, from the dead, so that their love would not be challenged by distance and time. They had these great expectations because Jesus had shown that he had the power to make them happen. Another group in the crowd that greeted Jesus that Palm Sunday were called zealots. Today we'd call them radicals or terrorists, perhaps, far left, far right, doesn't matter, extremists, either way. The Hebrew zealots they expected a military Messiah, one to lead them to victory over the Roman occupiers and over the political system that did not serve them. For them, physical violence was the path to change the world. Maybe at the base of it, I don't know, maybe they just wanted a safety and security for their physical selves and for their families, and a power over that which would do violence to them. It was thought that Simon was a zealot, one of the disciples. And more importantly, it was thought that Judas as well was a zealot. The last group identified as having great expectations of Jesus were the disciples. What did they expect? Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps they expected a victorious Jesus, that Jesus would usher in the kingdom of God somehow, perhaps supernaturally, and they would be there in the glory, each of the disciples sitting on each side of the throne. As the Hebrews were preparing for the Passover festival, Jesus entered into Jerusalem riding a donkey. By today's standard, we probably would not be very impressed. In my mind, it would be like coming into town in a Ford Fiesta rather than in a Cadillac luxury extended limousine. In that day, for someone to ride into town at all rather than walk was impressive, and it had significance. One significance was the fulfillment of Scripture. Zechariah 9, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey." Another significance of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey was cultural. The back of your bulletin today points out to Jesus' humility in choosing to ride in on a donkey. For anyone in that culture, to ride into town on a donkey or on a foal was an entry signifying peace. That was the significance. He signified peace. To ride into town on a stallion or on a horse was to signify war. Jesus brought the message of peace, shalom, wholeness of person. Christian writer Fred Craddock says that Jesus' Palm Sunday entry into Jerusalem has three meanings, he says. On one hand, he says it was a parade, a celebration of recognition. He says as well then that this entry into Jerusalem was also a protest, a peaceful protest that in the end was also a funeral procession. Of the expectations that we discussed earlier, the Pharisees, the crowds, the zealots, and the disciples, which group do you think had the most realistic expectation of Jesus? The Pharisees expected Jesus to attack the status quo and their power base. The crowds wanted a miracle healer. The zealots expected military victory, and the disciples, they expected reward. Which expectation is most realistic? Personally, I think it may have been the Pharisees, because Jesus did indeed want to change the way things had always been done. He came as a human sacrifice for the purpose of divine forgiveness and to give opportunity for sanctification without the need for the Pharisees. The other groups, the crowds, the zealots, the disciples, these are the three groups who face disappointment by the end of the week. What started out as a triumphal entry, by the end of the week, all of their expectations had gone unmet. The crowd's response to their disappointment, we might say that in resentment they called for justice. Give us Barabbas, the criminal, and crucify Jesus instead. The zealots' response to Jesus, not calling everyone to arms, I think we can see their response to their disappointment in Judas, who was probably thinking, let's force Jesus' hand. If faced directly with Roman oppression and violence, he will be forced to call his angels and smite our opponent. And we know how that ended. They reacted to their disappointment, how would you say it, in shock, maybe? They all disappeared and ran away, at least initially. With time, when Jesus came back to them again, they worked through that disappointment and began spreading the word. So of those different ways of reacting to disappointment, this was probably the best way, long term, of any of the groups to deal with their unmet expectations. And it may be all that we can expect humans to do. We're all going to face disappointment at some time and in some manner in the course of our lifetimes. The healthy way to handle it is to not try to force God's hand, and it is not to react in anger. When expectations are not met, take time to sort things out, figure things out, all the while staying true to the example given in the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. We haven't spoken yet about Jesus and about his great expectations. As Jesus rode into Jerusalem to the exuberant and expectant throngs, I have to wonder what Jesus might have been thinking. One of my favorite characters when I was younger, well, he's still a favorite character, Charlie Brown. I kind of look like him now. Charlie Brown of Charles Schulz's Peanuts cartoon strip. Charlie was a baseball pitcher. Every time he took the mound, he wondered to himself, he thought to himself, will I be the hero or will I be the GOAT? He knew that the pitcher or the play director or the one who is front and center have great expectations projected onto them. They're expected to be the hero in the minds of the people. Was Jesus wondering how he would be seen? Would he be the hero or the GOAT? Or did he know full well what unmet expectations would do in such a painful ending? I think he probably knew that things would not turn out well for him. Not only was he fully human, but also fully divine. He knew God's purpose, and he knew what people's reaction to disappointment could do, how disappointment gets expressed in anger, rejection, denial. He had actually been having that conversation with his disciples. I think in the steps leading up to Palm Sunday, in the steps leading up to Friday, I think Jesus had let go of his expectations and had given himself over to the will of the Father. Even social science today agrees that this is healthy, the healthiest way to deal with expectations. Jesus models the healthiest way. A Psychology Today article says, and I'll quote, "Let go of expectations and find something to be grateful about, even when things do not turn out the way you hoped. And you will experience serenity and inner peace rather than resentment." Let go of expectations. A lot of people live their lives wondering that same question about how life will turn out and what to expect for them. Will life make me a hero or a GOAT? And you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if other people think of you either way, as a hero or as a GOAT. It matters that you are a hero to Jesus and to your relationship with God. Give God your expectations. As Pip discovers in the Charles Dickens novel, the expectations that are important in life are loyalty and compassion. As the disciples discovered, What matters is the love of a God who loves you so that he sent his Son to be crucified, that whoever believes will not perish.